everyone. Welcome to the Robert and Frances Fullerton Museum of Art. I am so happy that you are here today. I am Dr. Kate Liszka. I'm an Associate Professor of History and also the Benson and Pamela Herrera Fellow in Egyptology. And I'm here with Dr. Meredith Brand.
Hi, I am the W. Benson Herrera Scholar in Residence for Egyptology at CSUSB, and I'm here with Dr. Liszka to talk about shabtis.
Welcome back. We have the next episode on shabtis today, and we are going to give a very quick chronological overview about how these really fascinating artifacts changed over time because they evolved with ideas of Egyptian religion.
So like most material culture, there's a long period of use. And what we see in the beginning are these wonderful images of people doing work. And these are found from tombs. So this one dates to the Old Kingdom. So this is the 3rd millennium BC.
Yes, but why would they have images of work being done in their tombs?
Well, people in the afterlife, they needed all the things they needed in their life on earth. So that included things like bread and beer and food. And so what they would want is to have images in their tomb that would magically come alive to do all of this work for them in the afterlife so that they could reap all the rewards. So what we have here is a servant statue. This is from the Old Kingdom. This is around mid-3rd millennium BC. And this is a woman, and she's grinding grain to make bread. This was a back-breaking endeavor in ancient Egypt. You couldn't just go to the store and buy some bread. People had to grind it, and it was a huge, huge, huge bit of work.
But this is also something that every single woman, or possibly every single person in Egypt, would have had to have done in their spare time. This was their daily work so that they could eat. And certainly, if you're trying to relax in the afterlife, you don't want to spend your time grinding grain.
No, you would not.
No. So these small statues would have the purpose of coming to life so that the tomb owner in the afterlife would actually continuously have a supply of grain as well.
Yes, so these images are symbolic and they ensure a nice afterlife.
No, but these also change over time too. These servant statues are primarily only used in the Old Kingdom, so 3rd millennium, something like 2700 to 2200. But when we get into the Middle Kingdom, they evolve into a whole new idea. They evolve in their form, but they don't necessarily evolve in their practice. So even though this object looks absolutely different than the previous one, the point of the object in the tomb was the same. It was to do the work for the deceased in the afterlife. So as we move into the Middle Kingdom away from the Old Kingdom, objects shift their form and how they look, but the purpose of them was exactly the same, to do the work for the deceased in the afterlife.
So this is a servant statue of sort, evolved in terms of style. And this is from the late Middle Kingdom, around 1700 BC. And this has a figure of a person working. And we start to see something different that wasn't on the servant statue. We see a series of hieroglyphs right here. And this marks a change from the servant statues where there's actually magical formula that can help this image come alive.
But Dr. Brand, can you talk about, you said that it looks like it's working, but to me, it looks just like a statue. So why would the shape be different?
Well, the shape is different because he's going to come alive to do this work in the afterlife. So in the Old Kingdom, we see statues that are dynamic. They're moving, they're in the middle of work. But this one, it relies now on magic.
But that would also mean that in the Old Kingdom, you would need a different servant statue to do each activity. So you would have your grain grinding in one, and you would have your field bearing in another.
Yeah.
But here, this guy can do it all for you.
He can do it all. So with the spell, it gives you the ability to command this guy to do all the work that you need.
So once these were invented in the late Middle Kingdom, Second Intermediate period, did people like them? Like, was it something that continued to evolve?
This was something that continued to evolve. People like the idea of having an all-purpose funerary figure that can do work in the afterlife.
So what did it look like in the New Kingdom then, when we get to, say something like 1500 to 1000 BC?
So here we have New Kingdom shabtis. And this is one figure who's mummiform, so quite like the deceased. We have this series of spells, and we have a coffin that this figure would fit into.
So you're saying that originally in the tomb, this would go inside
Yeah.
with the lid on top.
Yes.
Oh, that's very nice, because then it parallels exactly what's happening to the deceased in the afterlife, with their mummy being placed inside of a coffin. So their Shabti also gets a coffin.
Exactly. So this figure is treated just like the deceased, and just like the deceased, he would have his own active afterlife where he would be doing tons of work that the deceased wanted him to do.
That's a way to get out of work.
It is. And then we move on.
So these were really liked. I mean, looking at this type of model, I would assume that it would take a long time to make one of these artifacts, that the craftsmen who were creating them needed to spend numerous hours making each one. Is there a way that would speed that up?
Yes, so what we have in the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom are wooden shabtis, and these are individually carved. They're painted by hand, and people would only have a very small number in their tomb. But this was kind of a problem because you don't really want one person doing all the work for you in the afterlife. You want lots.
Yeah, you got to be nice to your staff, right? Like you can't just have one person do everything for you. So how many people would you want to have working for you in, you know, a mythical world like the afterlife where you could have as many as you want?
Well, eventually we get to the point where people wanted one person to work for every single day, plus extra days for weekends.
So you're saying there would be upwards of 365 Shabtis inside of a...
Even more.
Even more!
You'd have 365 shabtis, plus you would want to have one for each end of the week. So ancient Egyptian weeks were 10 days long, so plus one for each of those. But we aren't there yet.
Can we all get a job like that where we only work one day a year?
That would be nice.
It would be nice. So let's look at the Shabtis going up to the next level.
Well, these guys first, they're made out of wood, right? And they're only individually carved. You have a few of them. And this is a relatively medium cost artifact from ancient Egypt. You had to pay for the wood, you had to pay for the labor of carving it, and all the pigments.
Yeah, but I've seen King Tut's that are in the Cairo Museum. Those are gorgeous. They're also made out of wood, but they are purposely plated in gold. Certainly that wouldn't be as cheap.
No. So they were definitely made out of more luxurious materials. But then we move forward into the Third Intermediate period. So
I noticed that these are a different color and they're substantially smaller than the ones we just looked at.
yes. So these are made out of a different material called faience. And we'll talk about that in the next video. But this is a natural man-made material that can be made relatively cheap, and they can be made with molds, which means you can get lots and lots of them. So the style completely changes in the Third Intermediate period, and they become very popular. Everybody wants them in their tomb, regardless of social status.
So you're saying that they could actually like mass produce these cheaply? You don't just have one or two, you might have your 365?
Yeah, you would have a lot of them, as many as you could make, really.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the plastic of ancient Egypt.
It is. Well, I mean, I consider pottery to be the plastic of ancient Egypt because it was the
probably
cheapest
true.
material to make, and you could store stuff in it.
Yes.
But a step up from pottery would be faience. This material is made from silica, which could easily be obtained from sand or anything like that. It's made from lime and some kind of alkali material. It could be plant ash or something like this, plus a colorant. And usually this color, blue turquoise, is made from copper. So all this would be mixed together.
And all of those are natural materials that they have throughout Egypt.
Yeah, natural materials they have throughout Egypt, relatively easy to find. And they would make these in molds. And we have here a mold from the New Kingdom for faience, which is slightly different material. This is an amulet. This is a scarab amulet. But the principle is the same. So these molds are made out of clay, and they would have the impression. So you would take this shabti and you'd make the impression in the clay, this side, and then pour the mix of faience into the mold, and then bake it and pop it out of the mold. So in this way, you can mass produce as many as you need. So yes.
What a great idea.
It is a great idea. So here we have a Third Intermediate period shabti. And we know that this is mold made. It's got this flat back. And he has some very distinctive features of Third Intermediate period faience shabtis. He has this headband we call a fillet, and it goes here in the back. And he's got his basket ready to work, slung over his shoulder. And he has his Book of the Dead calling spell to get him to show up and enthusiastically start working. But this one still requires a bit of work. You have to have the fillet painted on, you have to have the details of the eyes, you have to have his hoe that he has here for agricultural work, you have to paint the basket, and you have to paint the spells. So this was still a considerable amount of time investment. And
Can we make it faster and cheaper?
we can make it faster and cheaper. That's what the ancient Egyptians said. And they thought, this is what we should be doing. We can make these shabtis that are small, and they can be made by the hundreds very quickly.
So I'm assuming that when you do things like you take off the individualizing elements to them, you remove the names and you remove the spells, that the way that you still associate them with the deceased is on location. If they are in the tomb of the deceased, they work for that deceased. So they could in fact be used for anybody and everybody, but it depends on their association within the tomb to become individualized for that person.
Yes. So by placing these in the tomb in a magically activated space, they're going to come to life. So we have a shorthand version that become more symbolic even. So it moved from the Middle Kingdom, large wooden, individually carved Shabti figures, to the late period where they're small, made out of faience, mold made by the hundreds, to become very popular for funerary ritual in ancient Egypt.
Now this one, isn't it from the Greco-Roman period? It is actually made out of bronze.
This one's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's stunning. So it's got the same sort of features. You have the same kind of small size, the same spell here.
Right. But it's slightly more expensive to make because the material has changed. Faience is very cheap, but bronze is metal. So that's essentially like walking around with actual money type of things. Yet this was still mold made. You'd still pour the molten metal into a mold, maybe not a faience one, but it's the same idea. Usually it's a lost wax method. And then again, you can pop out your individual shabti. So it's a way of having a slightly more expensive one simply because of the material, but at the same time, it is still quick and easy to make.
Yes.
So Dr. Brand, you're saying essentially that these changed dramatically over thousands of years of history because ancient Egypt is not a stagnant place. Ideas, artifacts, their connections with the afterlife all dynamically change over those thousands of period. And yet the religious idea is consistent through all those thousands of years, not wanting to actually do work in the afterlife. I mean, who does?
Who does? So a way to avoid work in the afterlife has changed materially over time. And we can see this reflected in the changes of shabtis.
I think I'm going to go out and buy myself some shabtis.
I think you should.